Now, as per Finance Minister Dr. Kasila Atuforsen, it's a troubling economy, but it will be fixed. That's according to him. And that was the state of Ghana's economy as he painted it, as he presented his maiden budget for 2025. But not without backlash from the opposition NPP. They described it as one of lamentations. In fact, the minority leader called it an Azan budget. We're going to unpack the issues highlighted in the 2025 budget, where the government said to abolish some 5 taxes, including the infamous e-levy, betting tax, and others under a certificate of urgency. Joining us in the studio, we all call him the Honorable Seth Terkper, former finance minister and presidential advisor on the economy. Good morning.
Good morning to you and good morning to your viewers and listeners.
Good to have you join us in the studio.
Yeah, it's been a while.
I want us to, it has been a while. Yeah. I want us to start from the very start. What did you make of yesterday's budget presentation? And I ask that question from the standpoint of what I've heard from some economists, some people in the business sector, even spare parts dealers in Aboswokai. What did you, as Seth Terkper, former finance minister, now presidential advisor on the economy, what did you make of the budget yesterday?
Well, you're talking to somebody who was involved, in
the crafting of the budget.
Yeah, I mean, but of course, that's not to take anything away from the minister, who I think made a very good delivery. And the point, what I make of the budget is that, one, we spoke the truth, backed with facts, numbers, to show whether you're talking about arrears, whether you're talking about particularly the energy sector, heavy burden that we have, whether it is roads. It's not just about saying that we have problems, we have troubles, but within a period that the budget was prepared, we gathered facts. And you will see from the narrative and from yesterday's even presentation here by the minister on PM Express, the painful process that one had to go through to face what happens, or to get a facts about what happened to the tax refund account, which was set up, to facilitate refunds, because there will always be refunds. And what happened to those funds, the misapplication of the funds. So I would say, then secondly, you also saw a reflection of the determination of His Excellency the President. Remember, he quoted the President in ending by saying that we will fix the economy. Of course, he has fiscal responsibility, as other ministers have their responsibilities, like Gadamse and the rest. So he's echoing, His Excellency's determination across board, all his ministers, to be aware and to deliver. There was also the promise, if you remember, after the SONA, from the promise given, to which the chairman reflected again on one of your programs, that's Dr. Yamsen, that his expectation is that the recommendations and others will be, factored into government programs. And I think you also saw some of the recommendations of that dialogue coming in, as well as education and the rest. So, in summary, we've presented Ghanaians with the facts, and that is what it is. The next step is to solve them. And we can go over some of the proposals that are made. I noticed that you quoted the tax aspect, which everybody is talking about.
Right. And of course, quite a lot to unpack. But before we get there, just out of curiosity, Kasila Atuforsen was your deputy at a point in time at the finance ministry. Now he's minister and you are advising him. What has it been like? The rapport, the whole engagement, and of course you were in the thick of things, like you mentioned, in drafting this budget. What has it been like?
It's as surreal as taking over from Dr. Dufo. If you remember, I myself was a deputy.
To Dr. Dufo?
To Dr. Dufo. And And that was somebody who had been governor, deputy governor, had since working in Europe, on our, monetary and other issues, and who, after years, became the Minister for Finance. So you can imagine a wealth of, knowledge. He was very much a part of the ERP SAP, just as, the then and now late presidents and deputy ministers, Professor Meros and, Pakwesi, where when I was starting my career in the Ministry of Finance, these were the people who were bosses and gave us inspiration together with Sato Ahoy and the rest, So I think for me, it's gratifying for the Honorable Minister to acknowledge, the role I played, just as I also have to acknowledge, the role of, seniors, many of who are still alive, and take inspiration from, for example, the Honorable Pepra, with whom I interact, quite frequently. So I think it's, for me, an issue of succession. And there are many of our types, So as a management student, delegation is very important. When you have your deputy, you put them to the fire, just as I was, and he's come through. Remember, as in his introduction, paying compliments, as majority leader, first ranking, member of the House, a member of the Finance Committee of Parliament when I was a deputy, which is, so you see the legislative aspect also, policy discussions in Parliament come into play. So I am, confident that he has, gathered enough, experience and knowledge to be able to, to handle the task, which
and of course, with support from some of you, I've seen pictures with the likes of Dr. Wisdom Dogbe, among others,
That's
all,
right, yes.
backing you to...
There's a lot of goodwill, yes.
A lot of goodwill.
Yes.
But let me just mention this. So the minority described this budget as a budget full of lamentations, an Azan budget. To what extent is that true?
Is it lamentations or telling Ghanaians the facts? I think I would have been happier if they had said all the things that were said about arrears, all the things that were said about, the fiscal deficits, all the things that were said. Of course, they were quick to point out growth, which was the most positive thing in the arsenal and other things. When they tried to demolish the facts.
GDP growth of 5.7%?
Yeah.
Is that what you're referencing?
That's what I'm referencing to, which one would not want to take too much away, but obviously that itself has its issues because you can see it came on the back of, the mining sector. We know the Galamsey and the other issues, which were accentuated during that period. Of course, you're also coming from a low point. But again, if you point to the positive, you must accept, responsibility. And so I would rather that they came up and say that whether the facts that were presented in the budget from the energy sector, where we had ESLA to resolve some of the issues, from the road sector, where we had, again, an element of ESLA we don't talk about, is a enhanced road levy, which is in the ESLA Act. In the state in which we are living contractors, massive road work which hasn't been, completed. I think those are the things Ghanaians wants to discuss. Quite apart from the fact that Ghanaians know that it is this government that defaulted in our history in payment of our debts, despite the initiative to put oil revenue aside, to pay down an allocation to pay down the debts. And remember the endowment for the administration coming on, to inherit 2 oil fields in which we invested. I think Ghanaians now know about the buffers from the Stabilization Fund to Heritage Fund to, which were meant as counter-cyclical measures. First, a counter-cyclical measure, the Stabilization Fund, so that, we would, to quote them, not live on, move beyond 8 and the rest. Those are the measures that were there. I think the facts are there. all the resources that flowed, to COVID, whilst they continue to blame COVID. About $6 billion dollars, I would say, no cities, flowed in, for COVID. The fund had to remind us that there were pre-existing conditions, right? Which meant that, yes, you can blame COVID, but the economy was already, in trouble. So I think we should speak to the facts. And I would hope that during the debates in Parliament on, the performance, which has been laid out quite clearly in the budget, we would all apply ourselves, to the facts and not, just state that it's a lamentation. Of course, in a sense, it is a lamentation of the state of the economy, right? Yes.
Would you describe the economy as sick, as it stands now?
The numbers speak for itself. The high, numbers, some of the facts.
So the economy is sick?
Yes.
All right.
Yes, if you want me to be that emphatic.
Okay, so there are some interesting dynamics because I want us to quickly talk about the tax component of everything. 5 of them taken off, and there have been questions about some of them being non-existent, like the emissions levy. And of course, yesterday I heard talk about the Emissions Act and what it says, but the minority says it was never, rolled out. Then there's the betting tax, and the claim was that though it had been there, it had never been tapped into, that it had not been used. I heard the former finance minister, Dr. Amin Adam, talk about it. I heard Dr. Gideon Buako espouse the same ideas, the same thoughts. What is the truth? Because then I heard later Dr. Kassiel Atoforsen say that 80 million had been accrued from that pot. What is true?
Yes, and I think I listened to a program in which some of your producers, went back and quoted,
right.
GRA showing that,
GRA figures.
Yes, GRA figures.
Showing that.
I think the 80 billion, it was actually, research by one of, I think, a morning show or whatever, I believe the morning show showed clearly that GRA had included, betting tax. But the other
included
point,
in the sense of had it
when
been
you collect,
into, had there been collections?
Exactly.
Had there been collections?
Yes, that's what it is.
Okay.
Yeah. But suppose there were no collections. What is the point in going to Parliament? Right? To pass a law. If it's unfavorable, if you think you don't need it, what do? You go back to Parliament, right? To annul the law. So I don't see the point about it. It remains on our books. And GRA issued guidelines. GRA, maybe in the interval I can show it to you. GRA issued guidelines, right, for collecting the betting tax, right? So, but I think the more important thing I want to stress is it's not just about tax cuts. It's about the rationalization. I'm sure that you've heard us talk about that complement of what we want to do. What are we rationalizing and what is the goal? Ghana has four major taxes. They bring in 80% plus of the revenue, of tax revenue, right? Not total revenue. But significantly, since our grants have been dwindling, they also bring in most of the revenue. The first is income tax. All of us pay.
Indeed.
On your salary. It's an obligation. Once you earn income, whether wages, salary, profits by self-employed persons along the road, or big corporations, we all pay income tax. Corporate income tax, personal income tax, PAYE, okay? Now, if in our collective wisdom, we think that there's a group of Ghanaians, who are toiling, working, but can barely make it around the minimum wage, then we say let's exempt, a certain level of income to provide relief, right? If we also think that even above those, who are struggling and whose income may be exempted, you need to still lower the tax burden. You have a progressive tax regime, 5%, 10%, until those who earn above a certain income, who can support the economy better, maybe because the nation has invested in education, maybe because the nation has provided inputs and others and are earning, they then pay, taxes from 15% all the way up to the top. So income tax, it is the broadest. On the income side, on the expenditure side, again, we say there should be a tax which every Ghanaian should pay. In principle, every Ghanaian should pay. And that is the VAT, right? So these two taxes are neutral. Neutral in the sense that if you're a foreigner and you come and earn income, you have to pay, right? Unless, again, of course, in our collective wisdom, we go to Parliament and we say, wait a minute, we don't want to tax, textbooks. Let's say, any level, because it is an essential part of developing, the potential of the nation. We don't want to tax, certain elements of, let's say, health, basic drugs. Malaria is, now we're bringing in and supporting, the sanitary pads and all those. That's in our collective wisdom. Otherwise, we all have to pay, right? Now, the other two are more selective. Excise. I mentioned 4. Excise duty, right? And that's why they are called sin taxes. With due apologies. It doesn't really mean that everybody is. Because little alcohol, as even the good books, says, but they are teetotalers. But the majority of Ghanaians take a sip, whatever. But it comes with some, deficiencies. Yes, defects, right? And therefore, there's a tax, on alcohol, tobacco, petroleum, environment, pollution. So if you bring the car that is a guzzler, V8 or whatever, and you are, speeding and burning, you pay more by virtue of capacity, by virtue of the age of the vehicle, because it smokes and it does, or lack of maintenance, right? Then the last one, so you see in this case it is selective. The last selective one is import duty. But we are a nation that depends a lot on inputs. So again, in our collective wisdom, we say raw materials that are going to be used by Ghanaian businesses and the rest should attract a lower rate, right? Otherwise, you pay a standard rate. But we also say, just like the other taxes, if textbooks are imported, it shouldn't be just domestic. They can be exempted, right? These are the 4. Now, any other tax, right, without a specific purpose, right, is just distorting these 4 taxes. Okay. And they bring in, the 80-20 rule. It means that they bring in, there may be many, like right. The 23, 25 that we have now. Right. They don't bring in, more than 5 to 10%.
Now that we're talking taxes, there's also been the talk about the distortionary calculation of VAT.
I was just going to come to that.
Let's get into it briefly.
Yes, just briefly, yes. So why do you have to? We did a first exercise when we introduced VAT. VAT is a replacement tax. VAT replaces the sales tax. VAT replaces the service tax. And VAT replaces a number of levies. So that was VAT. So what we are doing is a deficiency in the tax regime by reintroducing some of these, levies. Why is it a deficiency? The calculation of VAT is tax inclusive, right? Because you may buy goods, no levies are shown on your invoice, even if you collect one, because they just say the price, this is what you paid, right? Other registered taxpayers is listed. So between the two of you, to unify the calculation of the tax, levies must be added as to the cost before you calculate the VAT. So of course, if, let's say, the cost without VAT and levies is 100, and you add 20 Ghana cedis, right, to the 100, instead of originally calculating the tax on 100, now you are going to calculate VAT on 120.
Exactly.
And that encourages evasion and avoidance.
Right.
It makes tax administration and compliance very difficult.
Tax avoidance in itself is not a bad thing, but it's evasion that then becomes criminal.
Yes. But avoidance avoidance is taking advantage. You know, in a legal
if there are loopholes,
there are loopholes.
Even in the United States, if there are loopholes,
the courts have decided that you go back. Yeah. But just to finish a quick point, so evasion and avoidance becomes pervasive, and the graphs are there to show that in spite of all these levies, right, our revenue performance is stagnant. It means there's something wrong.
In other words, if you make the situation amenable to the people and they don't feel overtaxed, then they'll be willing to stop even tax avoidance.
Yes.
Which in itself is not necessarily criminal.
Precisely. Because you remember they are competing. But let me add a second element. We did the customs, ICOMS, which used to be West Blue, and before that GCNet, and you know. So the customs has a system, right? The customs administration has a system called ICOMS. We merge IRS and the VAT service into the domestic tax division under the GRA reforms when we created GRA.
Right.
The system that used to exist, the strongest one was the VIPS, the VAT system. Now you have merged the two divisions. This is why we talk about ITAS. This is why even the IMF is telling us to implement ITAS. We don't have to wait for.
All right.
So that's another big deficiency, that there is no domestic tax system.
Okay, let me ask you a quick question.
Yes.
Because of time, I want us to make this very bite-sized. How is the 2025 budget, and moving forward, how are you going to address these issues, especially when it comes to VAT, for example? How are these issues going to be dealt with over time? We
have to go back to what we did in the 1990s and rationalize, simplify the tax.
We're going back to the 90s?
Yes, that was when the VAT was introduced. Okay. So what that we are doing is just going back.
I know it was in the 90s, but I was wondering why we were going back to, what thinking are we going back to?
We need to clean. As I was saying, you know, you don't need most of the levies. One, you need levies. For example, we used to have two levies. The fiscal stabilization levy and then the temporary import duty. Anytime we went into an IMF program to make corrections, we brought them in, they lapsed. So we had COVID. You see why there's controversy over the COVID. We had COVID, we brought it in to help resolve COVID.
Right.
After COVID, less levy. So that during the next crisis, we can bring it in, you know, to help the situation. So in other words, we want the tax system to be simple, you know, to not just to administer, but for taxpayers to comply with. Simplicity is the game, you know. A
quick point on taxes. Two main points I want us to get into, and then we shall move the conversation forward. Yesterday, we had a conversation with Stanley Aholu, who is president of the Ghana Chamber of Shipping. And the maritime sector, at least from what we have been told, contributes about 50% to our tax kitty. But there are so many slippages, problems, and of course, it is largely foreign-based because these ships are not owned by Ghanaians. These systems are not owned by Ghanaians. I practically heard nothing when it came to that sector. Is that something this government is looking at in terms of dealing with the tax situation?
The minister spoke about non-tax revenues.
Okay.
Those are fees and charges.
Okay.
And much of what, you know, is being spoken about, you know, by industry is the proliferation, you know, of fees and charges in addition to the levies. And again, like the example, they add to cost. And they result in inflation if you want to get to the macroeconomic level. You know, because businesses are either, if you want to comply, then you add it to cost. And if you are in an industry where probably you have a bit of monopoly on what you produce, businesses would like to, you know, would add it and you pay, right? Because you have no other choice. On the other hand, if you are in a very competitive area, that's where the evasion and avoidance I spoke about, you know, comes in. So simplification of the tax regime, user charges. You remember we also spoke about property taxes. They need to streamline, you know, the property taxes at the subnational.
I remember hearing that.
Exactly. At the subnational government level, that's a tax which is a subnational, which we call in Ghana MMDA.
So you know, technically what I'm asking then is, what is the plan? Because
the plan is...
The point is made that if we get even that sector alone right, if it's contributing that much to our national purse, if we get it right, how much more could we accrue? So what is the plan?
There are the targets. You know, currently we are hovering around 13 to 15%. the sub-Saharan African average for tax to GDP ratio is 17 point, not total tax,
Right.
just the tax, including VAT and income tax, which are there, is 17.5, 18%. And as a middle income country, we are no longer a developing country. That is where we should be. So we are looking to move, the collection of taxes, cleaning the inefficiencies and others by an average of 3 percentage points of GDP. But you don't do that in a year.
Right.
Right? Now, you don't also rush, right? Remember, we're not talking about annual, right? We're talking about promises that were made, promises made to do cleaning over the 4-year period, within which time you would see first a turnaround and then a complete change. So that's why the minister is saying, yes, we are proposing some low-hanging fruits which we want to implement immediately, but we would come back to Parliament, not just with the VAT, but all these fees and others.
So eventually,
by the media review or going to the 2020.
Within what period are you hoping to?
We're looking to, first we have to amend the laws and do, so the VAT, I think that he mentioned that there's technical assistance, coming on the way. So I see the window for that as extending to the media review, which is now legal. Yeah, yes. And then others which will require, for example, ITAS, to fix ITAS, have a domestic tax system for all domestic taxes, and it can be extended to the user fees and charges.
Right.
That could take us probably, by the time you finish all the modules and cover all the taxes, all domestic taxes, with an interface to customs, right? That could take probably up to the end of the year or somewhere.
So let's say by 2026, we should. By 2026, we should look at something.
Yes, we have the experience to be able to implement most of the measures by 2026.
How about
in the 2026
duties?
Budget?
Import duties. Was there talk about that? Not that I heard.
Yeah, it's among the 4. If you remember, I mentioned the 4 core. And the purpose of import duty is to protect domestic. So that's also discriminatory.
Okay.
If you don't buy a pen that is imported, like this, that's what I'm holding, no import duty. That's if you buy a big, which is now produced in Ghana. There are companies that are producing. Of course, we waive a bit, it's part of the rates on the raw materials that they use to produce.
Right.
So it's protective in a sense that it protects local industries. And it's discriminatory for consumers because if you don't use a foreign pen, you don't buy a foreign pen, Mont Blanc, which is the topmost.
Exactly.
You don't
if you're buying a Mont Blanc, then of course.
You don't pay import duty. Sorry, you pay import duty. Yes, you pay.
Because it comes from what?
Precisely.
France, Germany.
Yeah, it's a very, if for some reason we flourish as an economy and somebody comes to set up a Mont Blanc factory here for Africa.
Then that is waived?
It means that it's domestic, so you don't pay import duty on it. Yeah, and so that's why it's protective to enable us, generate.
My final bit on the taxes. Of course, you've taken out the e-levy, the betting tax, and all of these. The solution that was proposed by the finance minister. Those are the true nuisance taxes. To use the 2 nuisance taxes.
The true nuisance taxes.
True nuisance taxes.
To use the word, yes.
Okay. Well,
you remember that word came from Islam.
The COVID-19 levy is, but
COVID-19. I said that it is a tax that was introduced for calamity, and the equivalent we used to, was a temporary import duty, right? And then the fiscal stabilization levy or national stabilization levy, which is on income tax and on imports. But immediately it's over. If you add it and you keep collecting, there will be definitely some calamity, like the flooding, that took place.
And your solution is to dig into the tax refund kitty and utilize what is unused to make up for what the betting tax, the e-levy, would have accrued. This is thinking you've espoused before.
Actually,
as Seth Terkper.
Yes, I think the Honourable Minister mentioned, because it was part of, he mentioned the origin. We had refunds for VAT, because VAT, when you export, you get all the taxes you paid on your inputs back. So you need to have a very winsome, regime, and part of it is you don't want to export your taxes. You don't want to export your VAT. You don't want to, because you want to make your exports competitive. So the
Otherwise,
VAT
there'll be
law,
too many taxes on them. They'll be unattractive to
no,
customers
you can't
abroad,
compete.
and no one will buy them.
Our businesses cannot compete,
Right.
you know, because that is what even the mighty European countries say, whatever, they make sure that they alleviate. So by the time we receive the goods we are calling imports, they've taken off or compensated for all taxes paid to make them competitive. We also need to be. So when the VAT law was enacted, there was as in terms of the origin of these things, help, you know, there was a refund amount which the then VAT service was allowed to keep. In other words, when they collect the money, keep in a sense that they had an account with the oversight, right? To make the refunds, to make, you know, the tax system, to make the VAT actually efficient. Now, this was expanded to cover all taxes. That's the increase from 3% to 6%. So, for example, import duty, which we are talking about, you may import raw materials, right? You pay import duty on the raw materials, but you may produce, let's say, beef, which is exported to Togo, which is exported to, if not back to the European countries where it originated. We need to make exports competitive. So there's something called duty drawback. You know, you get a tax back, just as the VAT. So the long and short of it is that we needed to arm GRA. But once the money went into the consolidated fund, it could find other uses, right? So GRA was withheld that one in paying to the consolidated fund, and they were to use it for refunds. What the minister is saying is that only 43% of the money that had accumulated was used for tax purposes. And that doesn't mean that there are not outstanding refunds that have to be made, and the money was misapplied to other things. So there is some money in there now. What he has done is to take a portion to resolve our issues.
But is this sustainable? Is this something you're going to be doing
I think
over the years,
4%,
or is it a makeshift stopgap measure for now?
It's a makeshift, you know, and when you improve, remember that when you improve the tax system and your revenue begins to increase, as I said, right, even at 4%, the amount going into the funds will increase, you know, and if, as and when we get to 6%, you know, sorry, the equivalent of 6%, we could go back to the 6%. You know, if that is what it means to make our exports efficient.
Because the GRA will still have to give these tax refunds over the years.
And let me give another example. You see, we say that in the US, people file their returns. And we are going to April. You see a lot of people filing their returns. Why do they file? It's probably because the PAYE from Mr. Kapus withheld by your accountant and paid to GRA does not take account of the fact that you have children in school. You are looking after old people. There are allowances, personal allowances, which you have to file a return. So what makes it popular in the US is that they have a refund account. And so most people file, right? And when they file and they recalculate their tax, they get a refund. And so that refund becomes something like a saving over the year, right? Which you can use substantially. So there's a motivation to file, right? So if we had our refund account, and we get our accountants and others to assist businesses, individuals, employees to file, that is the money we'll be using, you know, as an incentive for people to file their returns because they would have paid.
So you're incentivizing it so that people will want to pay their taxes.
Exactly.
And of course, at the end, you get that buffer.
And it's a responsibility it's a responsibility of the state that if you have, just as you impose a penalty, if the state has used, you know, more than what should be your tax obligation, they should refund it to you. Yeah.
Is that money invested in any way, or is it just kept?
But that's the point. You know? It should have been even invested, right? Even in government bonds. It's government to government, yes. You know, but it was completely, you heard the minister, it was completely, you know, misapplied. Right? Even if it's for good.
I hear it went into paying of contractors and all of that, road contractors.
Yes,
is that correct?
But that's not the purpose.
Is that correct, though? Is that the information?
Yeah, I think the minister provided the information about some of the uses of the... No, it's not, because we have to, you know, remember at the same time, you know, we had the ESLA to clear the arrears, road fund, and the rest. So what happened to those funds, right? You know, why misapply those funds? You know?
So those funds were misapplied. Just a quick point. On the discriminatory nature of the taxes, because then a typical example would be you bring in used vehicles into the country from Japan, from Korea, from all of these places. You go on the market, you are seeing some mini vehicles costing 70,000 Ghana cedis, 80,000 Ghana cedis, and more. Now, you fashion vehicles here in Ghana, you assemble them, okay? Volkswagen is doing that, among others. Kantanka is doing its own thing. And yet they end up being more expensive than, you know, some of these other vehicles in terms of the used vehicles and the new vehicles made in Ghana. The new vehicles made in Ghana, look at the pricing, way more expensive. How then do they compete?
Well, one, when you use a vehicle assembled in Ghana, most of it is assembled, our roads are conditioned. Remember, it's been, you know, how many years? Let's say 4 or 5 years since we started producing. So we are going to be having our own used vehicles, right? But because the roads and the compliance, you know, emission laws and things are very strict outside, you may bring a vehicle which is about 50,000 miles, and it may look brand new.
It may be in better condition.
Maybe in better condition, you know, than. So I think that, you know, you see the complement of having good roads and making sure, you know, so when we have a complement of, you know, second-hand used vehicles which are assembled here or manufactured here, if we get to that point, then we need to make infrastructure important. We need to make emission tests and whatever, DVLA, and have to make sure these things are so that when you go and buy a Ghanaian second-hand car, it will not be in a dilapidated state, right? But it will be in a good condition, just as, you know, but the protection is still there, you know, but that's why, and these are areas where legitimately you may give more incentives for the vehicles to be, you know, imported here, and you don't abuse the exemptions that go to Parliament. It needs to be scrutinized because we also want to produce. We also, it creates employment. We don't have to, you know, generate employment for, you know, outsiders, you know, and so you top up the exemptions. It shouldn't be excessive, but you top it up in order that you encourage the production, you know, of goods, you know, the car is big and, you know, yes.
All right, and how does the current budget address that situation?
The rationalization of the tax regime.
Rationalization of the tax regime. Generally?
Yeah.
Okay.
Generally, yes.
Let's look at our debt situation, right? Yeah. The Bank of Ghana, the central bank, is calling for a bailout of about 53 billion Ghana cedis. Then you look at ECG, Cocoa Board, you look at the IPPs. Together, it's about 100, and if I do the calculation, 68, 32, that's about 102 billion.
Yes.
And we are looking at 68 billion for ECG, 32 billion for Cocoa Board. The IPPs, about 1.73 billion. And then you put that actually side by side with the fact that we've paid 9.2 billion Ghana cedis in February in terms of our debt situation. In July, we will pay 6.2 billion.
That's the suspension of the debt which we had.
Okay.
You know, which was front-loaded.
Front-loaded.
So many of them were actually, you know, back-loaded, if you like, you know, not to come into, to come after the elections, if you want to think so. And so we are, yes.
And then another 10.1 billion in August. How per the budget and how as a government?
Let's look at the...
Let me not even say as a party. Are you going to deal with these, even including the central bank's issue?
Well, yes, but, okay, let's take the first one. The debt was suspended. Haircuts, after haircuts, there were suspensions and whatever. They are falling due, like the one that was just paid, you know, by Ministry of Finance as a result of using TSA and other techniques to pay. What happens if we don't pay? We say that's an obligation. You know,
it is
of course,
obligation.
Yes. You know, despite, say, for example, if you take IPPs, despite how ESLA was handled, if you take the enhanced road levy, if you take, you know, arrears owed to, you know, contractors and the rest, right? I mean, despite all of these things, there are obligations, because what is the alternative? You default a second time.
And if you default a second time, you are in the grip of an IMF program.
No, yeah, not just the IMF program, but for our own interest. We don't have access to the markets.
Your credibility also sinks
Your
further.
credibility, you sink further, because the opportunity to go and borrow long term, 10 years and whatever, you know, even from official creditors, when it's official creditors, that is the governments, you know, that give us money, the multilaterals, like the IMF, World Bank, and the others that give us money, our own African Development Bank, right? It becomes difficult.
And funding
you're unable to pay.
Has stalled. It has stopped, basically.
Exactly.
In respect of our budget.
Precisely. And actually, there's the Afrism problem, there's the EBIT, you know, the ECOWAS Bank, who gave us, you know, credit, and once they allow us a haircut, right, they will be deemed not to have performed well. Their ratings and things will be affected. This is why these institutions are being careful. So we have an obligation as Ghanaians and as administrators of the economy to resolve them. Let me take your mind back to single spine, which was inherited. Let me take your mind back to, when the oil pipeline was breached and we had to, and that is why it is painful, the misapplication of ESLA. We should have resolved the energy sector because the provision was there and we started paying down. We paid the VRA, a deposit, and spread the balance, and ESLA was to be used to clear it. We had a term sheet, to clear the IPP debt, because that's how ESLA was calculated to the penny, by the then parliament, right? So we took a term sheet. We were to take a loan from Afri-Exim, and then later use the ESLA to service the loan. ESLA was collateralized, and one would think that after collateralization, you would resolve the issue more promptly. So I'm saying that, yes. So we shouldn't forget that Dachi bond and all those things, they were also malfeasance in the sense that, they were for a purpose, right? If you did Dachi bond and you used the money to finish the E-blocks and the rest, that would have been a credit because it's a get fund, right? So all these corrections will have to be made in the interest of the nation. Otherwise, we will be doomed, like it happened to Zimbabwe and even advanced countries like Argentina and the rest, and we will not be able to borrow long term. The most painful is that we risk even not being able to borrow from institutions like the World Bank, where we can borrow and repay over 25 years. We need to bring measures like the sinking fund with the debt repayment account and all those things, back.
Right.
And it's something that has to be done. So when His Excellency says that we'll fix it, he's not saying that it's easy. But he's saying that with the determination and help of all Ghanaians, we should get ourselves out of this situation.
All right. I'll bring in some concerns of the minority NPP right before I get into the bit about the contracts awarded and stalled projects and what that is going to mean, that dynamic. The former Finance Minister, Dr. Amin Adam, makes mention of the fact that petroleum product prices have, if you look at the budget, it does not address their increments, which of course will take a toll on transport fares and all of that. There's also mention of the fact that as you are scrapping some of these taxes, you are also introducing others through the back door. Your reactions to these?
We are not introducing anything through the back door. We are rationalizing. So I don't know what specific tax he says.
Mention has been made of what you may want to do with the VAT and all of that.
No. We are correcting the VAT. I just explained elaborately what we want.
No, I'm just regurgitating what has been said.
Yes, and I'm saying that it's a misrepresentation of what we want to do. That's why I took my time.
How about the petroleum prices?
Petroleum prices. You go back to subsidy.
I am not saying we should go back to subsidy.
Well, I mean, that is
in the past. They
had told
that, in fact, in the 90s, we had to move away from some of these bits when it comes to even subsidizing electricity at a certain level, which we had to run away
from. When the minister says that we missed all the benchmarks under the IMF, it means they breached. One of them is breaching, the promise to adjust petroleum prices, right? Remember we were doing it then, okay, before I come to that, it means that they breached it. If you knew it was impossible, why did you accept it? Why didn't you tell the fund that this was impossible? And you leave a legacy of adjustments, for the oncoming government, and then you go back and you state that, it will be painful to Ghanaians. You did it. Of course, we did it, but remember, one of the strategic moves we made, which will be reintroduced hopefully, a portion of ESLA was being used. We had started, right? We had started together with Ministry of Energy at the time, a boss, to hold strategic stocks, right? Now, what do the strategic stocks, mean? Strategic stocks simply means that, and it's practiced in South Africa, in the US and everywhere, when the prices of crude oil or finished products drop, right? we bought using it part of the extra funds and stored them in the boss tanks. To the extent that we were going to even, use GIF to produce more tank farms.
The Ghana Investment Fund.
Investment Fund, yes. And we actually started the experiment, and it was working. So when the price goes down, you store, you buy and store. When the price go up, then you release.
But has that ever been a reality? Our fuel prices never really reduced by a certain component that you really feel there's a major reduction. Apart from sometimes last year, where in fact government was forced in some instances with the pressure for some reductions, real reductions to be.
Let me give you the tangible outcome. The tangible outcome is that is what we used to stop petrol queues. You recall back then that anytime oil companies said they were going to increase prices because the prices had gone up, Goyle with boss would say, then we released, the stocks, and we made a margin on it. You didn't even have to increase it to the price, because if you bought at 50, right, and the prices shoot up to about 57 before they get to 60, and you release the stock, right, you would have made adjustments around 60. But by releasing the stock, which you bought at 50, you could afford to release and price at 54. Right. So you don't have
to still make a profit.
Still made a profit. We made. Right. I remember the very first one. We made about 2 million or so, Ghana cedi profit, which means that it worked. So we are going to go back to some of these initiatives, which, as we are saying, Honorable Jinapo, in his maybe if you host him, he will give you, a lot more. I think energy is a very big headache, but he has a list of solutions. So I urge you to invite him, and he would explain the Ghanaians.
Let's quickly get into contracts awarded worth 194 billion Ghana cedis, and of course we also have the stalled projects. But let me also
the largest of which is the road sector.
The road sector,
apart from energy.
Then of course I mentioned the ECG and others, but that is on the bit about debts from some of these other entities. If you look at the key allocations to key initiatives, there's also the Akosombo Dam spillage victims. I'll get into this in a bit. But let's focus on the stalled projects component. We are looking at
let's take away before you go there.
You want us to clear
the Akosombo victims.
All right.
Yes.
So 2.5 million Ghana cedis.
How
are you sourcing these?
That is the essence of the Stabilization Fund.
I see.
Yes, that's the essence of the first time we took money out of it into the contingency fund under the Constitution was when we had the Kwame Nkrumah fire and flooding disaster back in 2015. Yes,
right.
The first funds that were released, just like COVID. Remember, the first funds that were released for COVID came from the Stabilization Fund, 250 million, US dollars. So if with one oil...
That's where you say it was left with what, $64,000?
Yes, yeah. Right, that's Stabilization.
And then some what? Is it
which also flowed, that's the sinking fund, which also, all of them come from the Stabilization Fund. The farm tank I was talking about, the tank farm I was talking about, so I'm giving you a practical example of these two practical examples of the use of that fund. We stored them when crude oil prices were high. Did we need the money? Yes, of course we did, right? But there was a need. We knew that and it was a lesson of the global financial crisis that made us implement it. The US had a similar example. So when COVID struck, the first money that was taken was 250 million US dollars from the Stabilization Fund. With 2 additional oil fields, we could have restored the cap. We didn't. We have withdrawn about 400, plus, probably around 5 million US dollars by now from the Stabilization Fund without, putting the money in and mainstreamed it, right?
So you're saying that these will not be a burden. Now, I just want to quickly go back. You've mentioned that this is where it will be coming from, the Stabilization Fund. The petroleum prices, you're saying that if you execute this properly, it would mean that the concern raised by the former Finance Minister, Dr. Amin Adam, will not come to play.
Yeah,
that prices will not be skyrocketing. The next best thing you can do, if you are not overseeing skyrocketing prices, the next best thing you can do is to stabilize. And so the prices will not be flip-flopping.
Yes,
going
because you do the adjustments and you complement it with what I was talking about. So you don't pontificate when you stop those measures.
And we're going to be holding you to this, your administration. We're going to be holding you to this.
It's already there. I think that, you recall that of course, we use the stabilization fund to pay the pension funds that were due, which were suspended. Yes. So that's a demonstration that we have started already.
Right. And so the 242.5 million for the Akosombo Dam spillage, how about the teacher and nurses trainee allowances, the free sanitary pad? There's also support for victims of course, the Akosombo Dam spillage, which I've mentioned, and then the recent Ketu South incident. Where are all of these coming from? Same source?
No, some of them will come from, some of them are
because regular, I think the teacher and nursing
some of them
allowances are from a different
some of them are regular allocations from the budget. Right. Here we are talking about
regular allocations funds that have not been so regular in the past.
Yes, but we have to regularize it. That's the point. You clear the arrears as we did with the IPP, the contractors, and we started doing, which were stored.
Right.
Right. So you have to just come back to managing the budget in a more efficient manner. Yeah.
So coming to...
And by the way, a reminder that, we ended, is with one oil field and with all these buffers and things that we created, we ended with a deficit of, 6.1% of GDP and on a new basis and a debt of 57%. So with 3 oil fields, we could have performed better.
So you're saying that with one oil field,
I'm pointing to precedents.
You could do this with 3 oil fields. This is the
and remember
the
we are talking to ENI and others.
So what does it mean then? Because the bit about the GDP of 5.7% has also been made mention of and touted by this administration.
After 0.4, you are coming from a very low point.
At what 0.4?
2 years ago, of course, post-CP.
Okay.
It was 0.4, right? And then that's the growth rate. And that means that the GDP did not grow as much as it should. I don't put all the blame on them. Of course, COVID was affected and the rest. But I'm pointing to the reality, that you're coming from, a low base. But that's not to take anything away. But I think we also have to, acknowledge that much of the growth, as a government statistician, if you heard him say, was from the construction and mining. And there's a cost, to the boost in mining.
Are you saying that the 5.7% GDP was, in a way, artificial?
The government statistician, no, it's not artificial. I'm saying that there's a bigger cost to that growth because he mentioned construction as construction and mining as leading the charge. And I'm only reminding ourselves that we have a huge cost of reforestation, because... On
the back of Galamsey.
Exactly, because we have to do the mining in a more efficient manner. So that itself will drag, further inflation, so we seek to correct them.
Are you being cautionary then when you estimate that the GDP will grow by 4.0%, especially when we are coming from 5.7%? That's a 1.7% decline.
You should always be cautionary with budgeting, just as you would do in a household. You know your salary, right? You can predict certain things, school fees for the kids, amount to feed and whatever. What you cannot predict is when the child will fall sick. What you cannot predict is, sadly, when you have death in the family and other things. And they require, preparation. And sometimes you go and borrow, but then you must learn to pay.
So what do these then mean for the ordinary Ghanaian? Overall real GDP growth and not nominal real GDP growth of 4.0% projection, non-oil real GDP growth of 4.8%, end period inflation rate of 11.9%, primary balance on commitment basis as a surplus of 1.5% of GDP, gross international reserves, and you're looking at including oil, funds and encumbered or pledged assets to cover not less than 3 months of imports. I think currently it's about 4 months, is it?
Yeah.
4 months of imports. So you're saying that you are going to ensure that it covers nothing less than 3 months at any given time.
Because you need a buffer. Because anytime your cocoa prices drop or you have drought and you have other things. So again, I need to come back to buffers, because that is part of the caution. Caution that you don't control certain factors. Some of them are natural and you are not yet at a point. And let me give you a quick example. When the global financial crisis struck, you know that the US was the one subprime that took the hit, right? When the Fed bought the securities and they stopped the collapse of the banks and bought the securities, when they put them back on the markets, like the bonds which we have now, if we can put them back on it, they appreciated. And they earned so much money that $3 trillion of profit was shifted from the Fed, the central bank, the equivalent of the central bank, to the Treasury. That is the money which the Treasury held on to and used to prepare better for COVID by giving immediately money, for vaccines and all those things to be, and even cushioned, those, because they had to do lockdowns and things, So I'm saying that it is inevitable, right? What I'm saying is that it is inevitable to run an economy, just as it's inevitable to run a household without,
So you are underestimating on a practical level, but you could overshoot those expectations, and that would be a further boon to the economy if you got that. But some would still say, on the back of the growth that was recorded by the previous administration, even on the back of all the dire situations they had to deal with, this is going back.
No, they could have done better.
They could have done better.
Yes, because it's a.
But then you could be held to the same yardstick. You can also do better.
Yes,
4%.
Yes, and we will do better.
You will do better.
Yes.
So why are you pegging it at 4% if you can do better?
Pardon?
Why are you pegging it at 4%?
But that's the realistic one, because you are looking at the realistic position of the economy. You are going to be paying arrears, some of which are for services that are gone past in the past, including the use of valuable IMF resources and austerity to do. You cannot, those who come, yes, there will be money in the hands of the contractors and the rest, but it made the economy, suffer previously. And mind you, it is for past, development. One is not saying that all the development was useless, but the way the arrears, the way even, we had something called the contract database, which we started, right? Which gave us, it started actually way back when I was a deputy. We didn't have a view of total, that's the Ministry of Finance, which is a coordinating point. They didn't have a view of outstanding contracts in the system by MMDAs. We started building it, right? And we were going to use it to calculate a better understanding of arrears and put it in a gift list. It was stopped. But then it was reintroduced, and by 2021, we were contracts in the system and arrears amounted to about 77 billion. That's including the contracts and the rest. Today we are talking about 125 plus, right? So we're saying that with the benefit of 3 oil fields, with the benefit of COVID flows, with the benefit, including what many Ghanaians paid when they crossed, when they had to travel and all that and take the shots and the rest, we could have done better, for sure.
If you look at the World Bank's
particularly
figures,
no default.
Right. If you look at the World Bank's figures in terms of the projected growth of Ghana's economy, the World Bank forecasts that the economy is expected to expand by 4.2% in 2025, 4.8% in 2026. Are you saying then that you are tailoring your budget according to some of these projections? 4% is just around 4.2%.
Yeah, because in the next 2 to 3 years, we're going to do a lot of corrections, right? And so you have to be very realistic and measured, because some of them will take a toll, right? And so once you are done with the corrections have both benefits and costs. As I said, to make sure that you remove this element of arrears owed to private sector and make the private sector vibrant, right? You are going to pay for past, arrears and even work which was done, which led to the growth we are talking about today.
And I understand how that makes economic sense. But the point is, the ordinary Ghanaian on the street has no more patience left. Yes, you are enjoying some goodwill now. Yes, it will take quite a bit to get out of the doldrums. But no, the Ghanaian has no.
We are aware of that. And that is why...
Very little, next to no patience left
we are aware
to deal with this.
And that is, we are aware of that. And let me give you a very practical example. You recall that in 2013, right, things were getting really, and the equivalent of the dialogue that was done there was cinching, right? We were working with African Development Bank on a homegrown policy. By the time we went into the IMF program, we actually tabled our homegrown policy for the negotiations, right? So I would hope that, and I expect, to be frank, that with the 4th review coming, these budgets and the proposals are going to be fed into the 4th review until we leave the IMF program, and then we'll continue. So we'll fashion it first into a homegrown, policy. And of course, the benefits of many of the things that we did, a debt repayment account, which would have avoided, with 3 OFAs, we could have avoided a default, which could have avoided a haircut and all those things. I think Ghanaians are now saying that.
Realistically, about how much time do you think it will take for the ordinary Ghanaian to start feeling the positive impact of the measures you hope to put in place as a government? Minding that political watchers will tell you that you practically have 2 years. And then after that, a lot of the goodwill would have been eroded. And then the politics will come in because John Mahama has 1 term.
But
then those who want to come in, the attention will shift. So
2 years,
what's the realistic time?
The 2 years is realistically the period you need to do even medium-term reforms. So, and then there are what you call the low-hanging fruits, like fixes to the tax regime, make it more efficient, and those can be done between 6 months to a year. I mean, quoting, yes. Some low-hanging fruits could come in as early as 3 months or so. So I think that we should be patient.
Low-hanging fruits like which one? Yeah. Very briefly, like which ones?
Low-hanging fruits like enforcing, tax collection and the rest, but which you cannot do in a very efficient manner without ITAS.
Okay.
The equivalent, the opposite of gift-based. That would enable you ramp up, your revenue performance in a year or so.
Quick question. Are you still planning to renegotiate a situation with the IMF?
I think we are enhancing the IMF program.
You are enhancing the IMF program?
For most of
what does that mean?
It means that we are giving ourselves, let me give you an example. We have always insisted that in our Public Financial Management Act, we use the fiscal balance, right? Not the primary balance, right? As an internal, check on ourselves. And we tell ourselves that when you calculate when you calculate the primary balance, you are leaving out arrears, you are leaving out interest payments, and you are leaving out debt repayments. But you will agree with me that these are 3 critical areas for us, big challenges, arrears, right? So you might feel comfortable using primary balance, but remember, you went through the arrears. One is on the board, which, yes. So you have to give yourself a bigger target which says that I need to clear the arrears. And so I am not going to assume that if I use a measure which excludes arrears, which excludes debt repayment and the rest, I'm doing better. No, you could do better. You could meet those IMF criteria and still not do better. And that is what the realization that we came to when we did a homegrown policy, which led to the establishment of the buffer stabilization fund. And of course, that came with the PRMA, Petroleum Revenue Management. But it was envisaged that we needed as a country, to do, because the history of IMF programs and things were there.
All right.
And we started implementing them. So we're going to be bringing, luckily, we don't need new laws. We need to tighten the laws rather. Yes.
I want us to talk about the 24-hour economy. But before we get there, again, just finally on the debt situation. We are looking at $3 billion, the equivalent of what we are getting for this IMF program, right? In terms of some of the stored
of which we've received about $2 billion. Of which we've remember.
Yes, yes. But the entire quantum is what I am referencing. And then you are looking at the contracts awarded to the tune of 194 billion cedis, which we are going to have to contemplate as well. Add that to the fact that, of course, you want to uncap the GET fund and do a number of things with that. You are looking at the Akosombo Dam spillage victims. You've spoken about that. The Kitu South situation, we've spoken about that. You are uncapping the NHIS levy to free some, 10 billion Ghana cedis. In there, you are then going to make the allocations. You are looking at paying assemblies, assemblymen and women. You are looking at the district assembly common fund, also the allocations from there, 1.5 billion to Agric, including the Nkoko Nketinketi program and all of that. We've said a lot, but just paint a very simple picture to the ordinary Ghanaian. How will all of this be executed? How will you be able to balance the books and achieve all of this?
No, the simple picture I want to paint is that the minister did not start with costs. The minister started with revenues. and it showed the revenue measures, and it showed the amount which we are going to attempt to generate, right? All that you have listed are allocations of that revenue. And this is where the tax reforms become very important. This is where, by mid-year, the rationalization of the VAT becomes very important, right? To go to Parliament, rationalize it, make it, in fact, the VAT is described as the fiscal engine, machine for generating, resources, right? So I just want to remind the audience that these are allocations, right, of what the minister said we are going to generate, which means that they are not outside the budget. What he has done is to move some expenditures from here to the other. So, for example, yes, the center may not receive, the DACF that is capped at the center, right? But it is going to lead to development. Who knows? It may lead to our issuance of, in the medium term, our issuance of municipal bonds, because globally...
Municipal what?
Municipal bonds. That's borrowing against the DACF to do, projects. Yes.
Okay.
Just as we borrowed against, airport tax to do Terminal 3, we borrowed against, the oil revenue, the pipelines, deprive ourselves of immediate consumption of those, used into consumption to build the pipeline. The same way we escrowed the same oil revenues, and later were to escrow the power that is sold from a tuabo to build a tuabo and the rest, right? So we are going to come back into these smart borrowing, self-financing schemes for major infrastructure. But a reminder, again, let me remind the public that the minister is not listing these things outside the budget. And as
they are all within the budget.
Exactly. And you have a media review. And I believe he will not hesitate if, God forbid, some calamity comes and we cannot, reduce, we cannot achieve the revenue target. But we hope that we can achieve it with the revenue reforms and things that we're talking about. So again, to repeat, these are not outside the budget. These are allocations of the budget.
Right.
And trading, sometimes, the central government taking too much money from the statutory funds, putting them back for them to play their role. So, for example, when we say, that we would push for completion of, say, the E-blocks, when we say that we will meet, some free SHS promises and the rest, the capping that was done, we are going to generate revenue, traditional revenues for the center, and let the GET fund play its role. So it's a reallocation of resources.
Realignment.
Realignment.
And he talks about, in that regard, an additional 4.1 billion Ghana cedis, specifically for free SHS on the back of that and capping. But you still have the school feeding, 1.788
the budget
billion. I'm just reiterating.
Yeah.
You have to plug the USAID deficit, which he spoke about. You are giving 300 million to the National Apprenticeship Program, 100 million to the Ejumara program. I'm talking CDs. You are providing free textbooks to students. The first years at the tertiary level, you are also going to deal with all of those within the period.
Yes, these are all allocations. But remember also, and I think it's important for me to stress this point, that the budget revenue is not covering all expenditure, and therefore the minister said we are going to borrow prudently. And luckily for us, the TB rates have dropped. Hopefully, we'll finish the negotiations, with the external creditors, and we may be able to get back to the markets and borrow, but borrow with a repayment fund so that we don't default.
Right.
Yes.
How much are you hoping to borrow in 2025 as a government?
Sorry, he gave the figure. Let's see.
We'll quickly get into that bit and find out what the estimates are that...
Yes, I need to go to the table.
Government is hoping to borrow as far as...
Okay, sorry, I've opened the page.
Is that the...
Yeah, if you have the budget, it's on page 128. Those who have, the budget, I think it's on the websites now. So financing is 2020, that's 2024 budget, sorry. We need to 2025.
So we'll get into those details. We need to get those specifics, and then we shall take it from there.
Okay, so 2025 budget, if I may just...
Yes, you can go ahead.
Okay, 2025, budget, we are looking to generate revenues of 224.9 billion, about 2225. Expenditure is going to be 281, which already you see 222 plus 281, so we are running into the deficit. And then
that's about almost 60 billion deficit.
Yes, actually, after it's calculated here as 48 overall non-commitment basis. So overall, it's about 50.
I don't have the specific figure. I know it was around 50. I know it was around 50 in essence.
It's 56. Okay, I'm reading from the table. And therefore, financing is the 56.9. So about 57 billion, is going to be borrowed. And then, but here we have made provision for repayment, what we call amortization. So this new borrowing will bring down, the balance, of what we and it's going to come from foreign and from domestic, sources, right? And then we are going to repay, and this is what we need to ramp up. In 2025, because of the constraints, it's going to be 9.126, and also the benefit of the debt suspension. But it is going to go up, in 2026 to 43.7, and then 2027 to 58, and then go down in 2028 to 47. So the increases are the result of what we call the humps.
Okay.
The debt suspension that are going to fall due, which we have to.
All right. I want us to quickly, I would be remiss if I didn't address the 24-hour economy issue. But let me first deal with the Hajj village and the cost, since the budget itself did not. So I just want clarity on that point. No state funds are going into the Hajj village, like directly from the state's kitty. And I'm sure you know why I am hammering on this point, because we were told same about the National Cathedral, and before we realized it, about $50 million had gone in there. What is the real situation with the Hajj?
I don't think we have the experience of a major project. For example, when we say that Terminal 3 will pay for itself, people doubt it, but Terminal 3 is paying for itself. When we say that the gas processing plant will pay for itself, it's paying for itself, or it's supposed to be paying for itself, unless there's a...
Seth Terkper, just clarify for me. The Hajj village is not going to be paid for by the state. It is.
And remember,
it is Ghana Airport Company Limited, and these funds eventually will come back to the Ghana. It will be self-sustaining,
yes,
self-paying.
Remember, it's a complex, which after Hajj will serve airport purposes, other purposes.
It will serve other purposes.
Of course, you can't just close
so after the Hajj.
The complex. Yeah, so you use it for alternative. Remember, there will be food joints and other things. Because it's meant to serve a Hajj. For maybe a month.
So it's the GACL's money that will go into this?
Yes, to go into it, and it will be the facility will be used to complement.
Okay.
The airport, and so I think we could come back when I have seen how it is going to be self-financed.
Maybe a final point I would want us to look at, the 24-hour economy.
Yes.
Some people feel not enough was said about it. In fact, at the SONA, President Mahama referenced that come the budget, we'll get more flesh to the bones of the 24-hour economy. We didn't get flesh exactly, did we?
We want to come back with a comprehensive picture, but it doesn't mean that nothing is happening. Let me give you two examples, right? If you drill down into the budget for certain ministries, there are traditional things that the budget always allocates funds. Street lighting, right? You can't do a night economy without lighting, right? So if you go into the Ministry of Roads, right, budget, some of which was mentioned, right, are solar street lights contributing to 24-hour economy? Yes, they are, right? Let's go to the health sector quickly. If you want the hospitals and the rest, to work, it's a program of allocation of traditional, resources for making Ayalulu buses more efficient, right? So that the hospital would work. Is it serving a 24-hour economy? Are there provisions for repairs that are made in the budget, to maintain, theaters and the rest, are they, contributing to 24-hour economy? So there are those low-hanging fruits, right? But when you get to big ones, for example, one efficient way of making sure that a 24-hour economy works is, which I can give, is to complete, the railway projects and batch the goods, right? And then they move on the water link to the terminal points, up north, right? Maybe do an extension of a railway line that will take the goods, by rail to Burkina Faso and the rest, so that at least when we build roads, these are cheaper ways of moving containers and the rest, right? These are integral parts of lending, borrowing, traditionally, but they serve a 24-hour, purpose, right? So I just want to remind Ghanaians that the 24-hour does not mean that, there will be no use of existing. In fact, the efficient use of resources, for example, the DSCF that we're talking about, right? What does the DSCF do? DSCF does infrastructure, at the district level. And there they are going to be fixing lorry parks. They are going to be fixing, almost every district capital has some night market, to it. So it is, when we ask that will come back, just like the VAT, we just want to add the bigger ones which are more, into the medium term, because right. This is a commitment. It's not something that's going to happen temporarily. Right. Yes.
Seth Terkper, my final bit to you, and we're wrapping the conversation here. So your final words. The finance minister hoisted a horseman bag or case, and suggesting also that we should consume made in Ghana, looking at how much we spend on many items in terms of our import bill.
Yes.
What's the plan? And the minority also said that there was no hope emanating from this budget. If there's hope emanating from this budget, this is the time you can look at the people of Ghana and address them. Over to you. Those will be my final.
If we are able to, and we will, take the country out of the gloom of haircuts and other things, and put and restore gifts, restore ITAS, restore the very things which were suspended for 8 years, I can bet that those will begin to bring hope to Ghanaians.
And how do we focus more on Ghana and consume what we produce?
That's the point we're making. So if we produce pens, why import pens? There are companies that are producing. If we produce, the bag that the minister was holding, if we produce school bags,
But what systems are you putting in place to enhance that? That's what I'm asking.
I spoke about the tax systems, the protection of local industry, making sure that we check smuggling and other, and then, as I said, some allocations to ministries and the rest who would champion, by the Ministry of Education. There's a lot, the Ministry of Education alone, there are fertilizer plants, Ministry of Agric. Do we always have to be importing? Yes, so for as long as they are beyond our capacity, but we need to be ramping up, our domestic production of, and this is where private sector comes in as a partner to government.
Seth Terkper, we're grateful for your time with us this morning. It's always, surgical when you come into the studio. And it's been good having you join the conversation. Seth Terkper is a former Minister of Finance. He was Minister of Finance between 2013 and early 2017, thereabouts. And of course, he is also presidential advisor on the economy. Let me tell you about the Ishmael Yamson and Associates Business Roundtable 2025. Every year, thousands of Ghana's brightest minds seek better prospects abroad, leaving a gap in our workforce. The question, how can Ghana inspire its talent to stay? Join David Ofosudote, Professor Mary Setrana, and Their Excellency Dr. Amina Gurib Fakim, a former president of Mauritius, at the 12th edition of the Ishmael Yamson and Associates Business Roundtable to discuss managing the talent exodus, leveraging private-public partnerships for growth. The date is the 7th of May, 2025. The venue, the Labadi Beach Hotel. The time is 9 a.m. To register your attendance, text your name and organization to 0530 117 202. Or you can send an email to info@ieyamson.com. That is IEYAMSON.com. action2stay.com. We're taking a breather. We'll be back with more Action Tuesday.